If there's one thing I think we can agree on about the summer of 2023 is that it has been extraordinarily hot. So, let's talk about that. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than usual, as I want to talk about another type of significant weather that doesn't get addressed as often as things like thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, and the like. I'm talking about the heat. And if I had to guess, it's likely due to the fact that less people deal with extreme heat on a consistent basis than those that deal with storms. That's a given. But heat waves also aren't exactly as flashy as traditional severe weather either. There's not much to watch other than the mercury rise. But regardless, extreme heat can be brutal and even fatal. But before I teach y'all more about extreme heat, I want to discuss what's been going on in our area throughout the summer and what led up to this point where I wanted to make this video. So, this summer on the First Coast has been pretty interesting from a weather perspective. We've seen some decent thunderstorms, though I feel they've been less common than usual. It's been rare, I think, so far this year that we've seen organized storm systems like organized low pressures or cold fronts coming through during the summer, meaning most of our thunderstorms come from interactions between the sea breezes, heat, and other bodies of water in and around the state of Florida. That's what I've been tracking mostly on this channel throughout the summer. But what's really stood out to me this year is the heat. Now, don't get me wrong, Florida is always hot during the summer, but this year feels different. Literally. Yesterday was actually the first time the National Weather Service had to issue an excessive heat warning in Northeast Florida, ever, because heat indexes were getting up near 115 to 117 degrees on the beaches. We've been stuck in a really, warm, just muggy, gross period. A pretty historic occasion, right? Well, Mother Nature must have thought so, because just 2 weeks later, the heat would come back with an absolute fucking vengeance. Because between July 22nd and August 7th, there were still many days where we were seeing heat advisories. Really quickly, what does a heat advisory entail? Watches and warnings related to heat can be a little bit confusing, as even the National Weather Service says that the criteria for issuing can depend from state to state and office to office. But generally speaking, the definition of a heat advisory is when heat indexes are expected to reach above 100 degrees for most of or all of the viewing area for at least 2 days straight, and overnight temperatures are not dropping below 75 degrees for 2 consecutive days as well, along with this high heat. Again, this definition may change depending on the forecasting office, especially in places that experience extreme heat more or less often than typical, more moderate warm states. For most of late July and up until August 7th, the feels like temperature was consistently hitting 105 to 100 degrees on most days, with the actual temperature often hovering in the low to mid 90s. And then that second week of August came. Starting on the morning of August 7th, an excessive heat warning was issued for the entirety of Northeast Florida, and then it happened again on the 8th, and on the 9th, and on the 10th. 4 straight days where heat indices were soaring into the 110s, some places recording heat indices in even the 120s. This is not normal heat. And on the 11th, the heat let up marginally, as the excessive heat warning was limited to only extreme coastal areas in Florida and Georgia, as inland temperatures were relatively cooler and not hitting the criteria for a full-on warning. Though the break did not last long, as on the 12th another area-wide excessive heat warning was issued, and as of the time of this writing on the 12th, another excessive heat watch is lined up for Sunday, the 13th. By the looks of it, this heat wave isn't expected to go away until at least Wednesday, and even then, it's still going to be really freaking hot, just not dangerously hot. And I would like to point out that right now, as I'm recording this on the 14th, that excessive heat warning did come true for the 13th, and it's the 14th, and there is another excessive heat warning for today. It is not letting up. Just like a heat advisory, the criteria for an excessive heat warning can change depending on the region, though it seems to be less variable due to the pretty high threshold the temperatures already have to hit to even be warned in the first place. Now, to understand extreme heat, you have to know about all the factors that play into it, and when most people think about the heat, they just think of the actual air temperature, which is fine. In many parts of the US, that's really all you need to know most of the time. But in the South, and especially along coastal regions like Florida, we have to deal with high humidity. In layman's terms, humidity is the measure of the amount of water vapor in the air. More commonly used, relative humidity is the measure of water vapor in relation to the maximum amount of moisture that the air can hold. When humidity reaches 100%, that water has to go somewhere, which often manifests itself into rain, fog, or haze. The higher the value of either of these factors, the more wet the air will feel. As a Floridian for almost 18 years now, I've heard this argument a million times. What is worse, wet heat or dry heat? But what do either of those even mean? So dry heat in this context usually refers to a high air temperature with low humidity. This is the type of heat that occurs out in inland Texas or the desert Southwest. And wet heat is usually a relatively lower air temperature. I mean, it's still hot, like high 90s, but usually below 100, but extremely high humidity, which makes the feels like temperature go well into the 110s and 120s. In my humble opinion, wet heat is 1,000 times worse than dry heat because it stresses your body out so much quicker. It leaves you feeling sticky, gross, and overall, it really just sap you of your energy. But why does high humidity make the air temperature feel to us so much hotter? The answer is actually really simple. High humidity does not allow for sweat to evaporate as quickly off of our bodies, and for those of you who don't know, humans sweat to keep us cool. It may feel warm and kind of gross when we're overheating, but it's trying to help us lower our internal temperature. But when humidity is really high, it can inhibit the evaporation of sweat, essentially trapping that heat like around the surface of our bodies. So we're being heated outside by the air and the sun, and the inside because of our own internal mechanisms overworking themselves because of the heat. This is why high humidity can be so dangerous, because in combination with higher air temperatures, it can quickly sap your body of water and cooler air. One more definition, and I promise we're going to be done with all this: heat indices. Long story short, the heat index is a measure of how hot it feels to our body. This is often portrayed as a feels like temperature. Do keep in mind that the heat index is not the same as actual air temperature. All the heat index is measuring is how humidity and the dew point impacts how we perceive the air temperature. There's some crazy math behind the equation I'm not going to get into because I don't have a degree in meteorology, but thankfully the people over at the National Weather Service do, and they provide these helpful public resources you see on screen to help us understand the phenomenon better. With all that knowledge now crammed into your brain, what is an excessive heat warning? Generally speaking, the definition is similar to a heat advisory, though the heat indexes are expected to be above 105 degrees. At least around here, the National Weather Service started issuing excessive heat warnings when the heat indices were reaching 110 to 115 degrees daily throughout the area. Again, it really all depends on the region. Florida's a typically pretty warm state already. We're more used to the heat than, let's say, a place like New York. So while heat indices of 108 here were only prompting heat advisories prior to the excessive heat in Florida, if you put those conditions in a state that's less used to the heat, it could possibly be considered an excessive heat warning for them. Throughout the week of August 6th, we were seeing heat indexes of above 110 degrees every day. Even on the 11th, when that excessive heat warning was temporarily replaced with a heat advisory for Clay County, I still measured a heat index of 115 degrees at home. Though I've seen higher than that, a lot higher actually. Using an at-home weather station, I measured an air temperature of 99 degrees and a relative humidity of 62%. Plug that into the heat index calculator provided by the National Weather Service, and you get a feels like temperature of 128 degrees. The heat index is taken more subjectively by meteorologists, so the National Weather Service, and also typically to the average person as well. That last example should probably show you why. But local conditions can have a major impact on local temperature as well, making it more difficult to validate these readings. So I decided to call the National Weather Service just to make sure something like this was actually possible around here, and it is. Unfortunately, I don't have a recording of the conversation, but I did get to chat with a National Weather Service Jacksonville meteorologist for a few minutes about the heat wave. And it turns out that Naval Station Mayport, a site where they take official readings for the station from, measured a heat index of 125 degrees. Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that this kind of heat is dangerous, but I don't think many people understand just how dangerous it can be and how quickly it can become dangerous. According to the National Weather Service, symptoms of heat exhaustion are likely to occur with continued heat exposure between the ranges of 103 to 124 degrees, though that is typically in the feels like. Feels like temperatures above 125 are likely to cause full-blown heat stroke with continued exposure. People who experience heat stroke often become confused, physically weak, and are likely to pass out or faint. Without proper and immediate treatment, heat stroke can put you in a coma or cause permanent brain damage. In some cases, it can be fatal. But you don't even need ridiculously high heat indexes or even air temperatures for it to be dangerous. Air temperatures as low as 90 degrees with little to no humidity could still pose a risk to your health without proper hydration. The best thing you can do to counter the heat is stay hydrated. In addition to that, remaining indoors with air conditioning when possible. But if you do have to be outdoors or working, be sure to drink plenty of water and rest frequently. If you begin to feel confused, overheated, and lethargic, stop what you're doing immediately and rest. And if conditions don't improve, you need to contact emergency services immediately. Conditions on the First Coast have been ripe for this kind of excessive and dangerous heat all week. A powerful high-pressure system is helping keep us very hot, while also inhibiting the development of most thunderstorms. I say most because, as you would probably expect with this type of heat, the atmosphere is pretty unstable, and thunderstorms will still develop. But as I mentioned earlier, that has mostly been scattered in nature. And by scattered, I mean they're the typical little small garden variety single cell thunderstorms. Due to their limited size and coverage and duration of time, they don't really do all that much to alleviate the heat. Now, don't get me wrong, I'll take any rain we can get. I went outside after a brief rain shower the other night, and it was the best the air has felt in weeks, even before the excessive portion of this heat wave. Though the air rapidly heats back up within an hour, and it doesn't feel so pleasant anymore. To summarize the situation on the first coast this past week, a powerful high-pressure system has been bringing dangerous heat to the first coast. With high humidity and little in the way of thunderstorms, heat indexes frequently soar into the 110s or even the 120s, with actual temperatures threatening to break the century mark every day. Though we were not completely without storms, and as a reward for listening to me ramble, here's a video I got of a storm cell on the 10th. Before I go, like I said, I'm recording the voiced portion of this on the 14th, and tomorrow will probably be the last day of the heat wave, so unless anything happens during the day and I don't upload this video, probably no more, like, incredible feats of crazy heat going to happen. But I will put it up on screen. I got an air temperature of 106 degrees yesterday. Is that not insane? But aside from that, that's really all I have for today. So, I know this was a bit of a different type of video, so I really appreciate you sticking it out with me until the end. As soon as we start seeing more thunderstorms, I promise First Coast storm tracking will be back in action. But in the meantime, watch out for another episode of Severely Overlooked, along with other miscellaneous weather projects I have in the works, like this one. Thank y'all for the continued support, please stay safe and cool out there, and I will see you in the next one.